Few American mysteries draw as much speculation as the Roanoke Lost Colony. A settlement vanished, leaving only one carved word and 1,000 questions. What happened to the men, women, and children who tried to plant England's first foothold in North America? Walk with me through the best clues, the strongest evidence, and the most likely answer to a riddle that still whispers from the sand and pines. Act 1. Setup. In the 1580s, Sir Walter Raleigh secured a patent from Queen Elizabeth, the first to explore and settle lands across the Western Ocean. Roanoke Island, sheltered between the Outer Banks and the mainland of present-day North Carolina, looked like a good staging ground. In 1585, an all-male military outpost tested the site, but it struggled with supply, storms, and strained relations with local Algonquian peoples. Most of those men went home with Sir Francis Drake. The idea of an English America, however, did not go home with them. In 1587, a new wave tried again, this time as a true colony. Around 115 settlers, including families, crossed the Atlantic under the leadership of Governor John White. Their plan was to build farther north in the Chesapeake, but the fleet's pilot insisted on dropping them at Roanoke. They rebuilt the abandoned fort and tried to reset relations with neighboring tribes through Montejo, a local leader who had traveled to England and back. That summer, Virginia Dare was born, the first English child born in the New World. Hope and risk lived side by side in a few wooden houses behind a palisade. Every colony needs supplies. John White sailed back to England to get them, intending to return quickly. Europe had other plans. War with Spain escalated. The Spanish Armada threatened England in 1588. Ships were pressed into defense. Voyages to a small, struggling settlement on a barrier island fell to the bottom of the list. John White tried and failed to break through. When he finally returned in 1590, storms and shoals fought him to the end. He stepped ashore to silence. The houses were gone. The fence line looked newer, as if the place had been taken down carefully, rather than burned or smashed. On a post, he saw a single word carved, CROATOAN, on a nearby tree. Crow. Before he had left, the settlers and he had agreed on a simple code. If they were forced to leave under attack, they would carve a cross as a distress sign. There was no cross. White took that as a message and a promise. CROATOAN was not a riddle. It was a place. It was the homeland of Montejo, on what we now call Hatteras Island. White tried to sail there at once, but weather tore at his ship, broke an anchor cable, and drove him out to sea. He returned to England without finding his people. The mystery began with a clue and a storm that kept the search from following it. Act 2. Escalation. A single carved word is a thin thread to hold a story, so the years that followed knotted more threads around it. From 1607 onward, the Jamestown colony began hearing rumors from local tribes about Europeans living among them or killed in the interior. Captain John Smith collected reports of survivors. A map sent to Spain in 1608, based on English intelligence, marked places where English people were rumored to live with native groups. Some accounts claimed a chief had destroyed a settlement up the coast. Others spoke of people in native towns who dressed strangely or used iron tools. These tales do not fit together cleanly, but they have a pattern: multiple locations, partial memories, and English objects in native hands. That pattern suggests an outcome more complex than one final stand. The Roanoke settlers had time to dismantle and move. With no distress cross carved, they likely left by choice. They could have split. Some may have gone south to CROATOAN with Montejo. Others may have moved inland towards safer farmland along the sounds and rivers. A few could have been captured or killed as alliances shifted. In a world of river highways and forest paths, dispersal makes sense. Archaeology began to catch up with rumor centuries later. On Hatteras Island, at the southern end of Old CROATOAN, researchers and local historians found European artifacts in native layers, parts of a rapier hilt, gun hardware, slate writing fragments, glass beads, copper pieces, and ceramics from the late 1500s. Some of these could have arrived through trade with earlier English expeditions. But the mix, including writing slates and domestic wares, hints at more than a few trinkets swapped on a beach. It hints at people living together long enough to share tools and habits. Another line of evidence came from a map. John White's own 16th century chart of the region, long held by the British Museum, includes a patch pasted over part of the mainland north of Roanoke. In 2012, scholars used light to see beneath that patch and found a tiny symbol of a fort at the confluence of rivers on the Albemarle Sound. It is where, years later, archaeologists would focus on a spot called Site X near Salmon Creek. There, teams have found small amounts of 16th century English pottery among native artifacts, shards of borderware, and other domestic pieces not typical of later trade. None of these finds are a headline that solves the case. They are not a graveyard or a fort with a sign on it. They are small, stubborn things that point in the same direction as the carved word on White's post. Move to trusted allies. Move to better ground. Survive by becoming part of someone else's map. Alongside these clues, there are false trails. In the 1930s, a series of carved stones said to be messages from Eleanor Dare surfaced in Georgia and the Carolinas. Most scholars consider them hoaxes. Stories that the Spanish hunted down and killed the settlers have no firm footing in the record. Genetic claims that a present-day community descends from the colonists remain unproven, though they do remind us that culture and family lines often blend beyond what paper can track. The strongest line in the ledger remains this: the colonists signaled relocation, not disaster, and later English colonists heard of, and sometimes thought they met, English people living among native groups. The pieces do not lock together, but most face the same way. Act 3, Climax and Aftermath. To understand how the Roanoke story likely ends, picture the region from above. Barrier Islands arc like a fragile necklace along the coast. Behind them, sounds and rivers form a protected inland sea. CROATOAN lay to the south on a long sand island with fish, oysters, and game. Inland, the Albemarle Sound reached fertile shores along Salmon Creek and the Chowan and Roanoke rivers. For people with few supplies, these were logical refuges. Native communities already lived and thrived there. Some had ties to Manteo. Others were wary of English hunger and iron. What would survival look like? Not an English town rebuilt in miniature. It would look like families joining households, learning new words, planting where the soil lets you grow, and using a mix of tools native and European. It would look like English bowls and jars that break and shatter into shards, left in middens that archaeologists later sift. It would sound like children switching languages mid-sentence. It would not leave a neat English line in the dirt. It would leave a blend. As Jamestown took root, the politics of the coastal world kept shifting. Powhatan power rose to the north. Epidemics and war-stressed communities. The English learned slowly, and at great cost, that the map was more complicated than it looked in London. Reports of people from Roanoke surfaced in this unsettled time. A group up the Neuse, a handful in a town on a branch of the Chowan, a rumor of a village where people remained of the English. None of these reports carry enough detail to be sure. Together, they sound like a fate without a headline. Some lived, some died, some moved again and again, until the names blurred. What about the carved word itself, CROATOAN? If you take it seriously, as John White did, the first stop in any search is Hatteras. He never made it. Later English did not try hard. By the time archaeology could take a look, 4 centuries of storms and sand had moved the island's edges. Yet the items found on Hatteras, along with oral histories from local families, about long ago fair-haired ancestors keep that arrow pointing south? What about the patched fort on White's map? If it marked a contingency plan a place to regroup inland, then small finds of English pottery in a native village nearby start to make sense. You do not need a palisade to leave a mark. A meal in a borrowed bowl counts too. The aftermath of Roanoke is not a clean line into Jamestown. There is no caravan of former colonists walking into the new English capital to say, "We made it." But the lessons matter. Early English colonization was fragile. It depended on native networks and knowledge. It failed when it tried to dominate those networks, and survived when it humbled itself enough to borrow them. Roanoke may be lost, but it is also found in small ways, in blended places, in the first messy contact zone of an American story that would repeat the same mistakes and learn the same lessons again and again. Twist, insight. The simple mystery asks, where did they go? The better question asks, why do we expect one answer? Roanoke teaches you to resist a single doom. Not everyone met the same fate. Some likely went to CROATOAN. Some likely went inland to the Albemarle. Some were welcomed, some were not. A colony can break apart without vanishing. Its people can survive by changing names and neighbors. The word lost describes our records more than their lives. There is also a second twist. The story's most important clue was never supernatural. It was practical. CROATOAN names an ally and a plan. The missing cross of distress says they were not under attack when they left. In other words, the colony did what good field teams do when plans collapse. They moved to safety with the people most likely to help them. Storms, politics, and distance kept England from hearing the full story. If you're looking for a single moment of tragedy that explains everything, Roanoke does not give you one. If you're willing to accept the human story of adaptation, fear, friendship, and hard choices, the pieces fit more easily than you might think. Reflection, takeaway. Here is the case in one breath. In 1587, English families settled at Roanoke, but intended to go farther north. Their governor went for supplies and could not return until 1590. He found the site empty, houses removed, and the word CROATOAN carved as a destination with no distress sign. Later rumors and a few firm clues point to a dispersal, some south to CROATOAN, some inland to the Albemarle, perhaps others lost to conflict. Archaeology on Hatteras and its Site X adds small but steady weight to the idea that survival meant blending in. Roanoke is not only a whodunit. It is a lesson in how people endure when plans fail. The first English families to settle in North America likely survived by trusting local allies and becoming part of their world. That choice left fewer English documents and grand monuments and more life. Which theory persuades you most? A move to CROATOAN, an inland relocation, or a split into both paths? Tell me why. If you enjoy clear, evidence-based dives into the past's biggest puzzles, subscribe for more unsolved history told with care. We'll keep following clues from lost colonies to found truths, and you'll be the first to know what the evidence says next.